A couple of statements of praise as we begin our lesson together this morning. The first statement is this: praise God for being a loving master. Isn't that great that we have a God that is a loving and perfect master and always treats us way better than we deserve? The second statement is, praise God for saving us from the worst master ever. And then Satan wants to destroy us, wants to make our life miserable. And at one point, all of us were his servants. We sold ourselves by sinning into slavery of the devil. And God comes by with this plan of offering his son up to redeem us away from the devil and make us one of his children. That is an awesome story that God has done for us, and we should all be very, very, very grateful for it. As we start the lesson this morning, I want to ask you this question: how many of you have ever had a terrible boss? Raise your hand if you've ever had a terrible boss. All right, most people have raised their hands. You've had a bad boss, maybe an incompetent boss. I noticed that some of the people raised their hands. I don't know if Micah, did you raise your hand, Micah? Have you ever had a bad boss? Is it your sister? Okay. So a lot of times we have bad bosses. It could be that they're incompetent. It could just be that they're mean. It could be a lot of different areas and aspects of it. This is a real problem we have. Sometimes we have bad bosses, and we have to learn to deal with that. And Peter tells us how to deal with it. So I want to read the text with you. It's in your outline. We're going to read from 1 Peter chapter 2, 18 through 25, and then sort of break this down into some points that will hopefully help us understand this passage and apply it to our lives. 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 18, all the way down through verse 25. It says, "Servants, be submissive to your masters with all fear, not only to the good and gentle, but also to the harsh. For this is commendable, if because of conscience toward God one endures grief, suffering wrongfully. For what credit is it if, when you are beaten for your faults, you take it patiently? But when you do good and suffer, if you take it patiently, this is commendable before God. For to this you were called, because Christ also suffered for us, suffered for me, suffered for you, leaving us an example that you should follow his steps, who committed no sin, nor was deceit found in his mouth, who when he was reviled did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but committed himself to him who judges righteously, who himself bore our sins in his own body on the tree, that we, having died to sin, might live for righteousness, by whose stripes you were healed. For you were like sheep going astray, but have now returned to the shepherd and overseer of your souls." Peter is talking to people who have had bad bosses. And he's telling us how to deal with having bad bosses. We're going to take this lesson in a similar format that we took the lesson on being submissive to the government in. We talked about how the government is supposed to make life easy for those who are good and hard for those who are difficult and protect the good from the bad. But what did we also learn? It doesn't always work that way. And our third point was, what should Christians do about that? So the similar three things we're going to talk about is this: God expects employees to be submissive to their bosses, and he expects bosses to be fair to their employees. That is the idea. That's what God expects. But that doesn't always happen. And so when that doesn't happen in our life, what do? How do we manage that tough situation? When we have a boss we don't like and we feel trapped in that particular job, how do we deal with this? And I would suspect that just reading that passage together, you were probably like, wow, this is pretty significant. I mean, this is a lot of helpful but hard things that Peter is saying here, because I don't want that. I told you last time that, a lot of us, including myself, have a little bit of a rebellious attitude when it comes to the government, and sometimes we have a rebellious attitude when it comes to our bosses, and sometimes kids have a rebellious attitude when it comes to their parents. And Peter says you can't do that. You can't do that. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. Thank you for being here today at the Palm Springs Drive Church of Christ, where we worship God, we study his word, we love one another, and we reach out to others, all to the glory of God. So let's look at our first point here. What does God expect? In the ideal situation, what does God want? He wants fair bosses, good bosses, and hardworking employees. That's what he wants. But it doesn't always happen that way. Let's focus first on the bosses. What does God expect from someone in authority over other people and how that person should treat them? First of all, in the Old Testament, there was a system where they had slaves. And God regulated this. He regulated it because he knew something about people. He knew that people with power tend to use that power for their own good and to hurt other people with that power. And so he told people in Israel, if you buy or have a slave that is a Hebrew. Now the main reason you might ask, why would a Hebrew own another Hebrew as a slave? Most of the time, it was for financial reasons. Most of this happened because someone found themselves in a situation where they had more debt than they could pay back, and they were either forced into slavery to pay that debt back, or they had to get to the point and say, look, I've hit rock bottom. I don't have enough money to pay all this debt back. I have to then sell myself to someone who will pay my debt off and work for that. But even in that situation, after the 6th year of service, the person was freed. So the person worked for 6 years, and after that, they were released. And when they were released with resources. So if I had hit rock bottom, I have no money, and I come to you and say, look, I'm in dire straits here. Will you pay my debt off for me? I'll work for you for the next 6 years. This is how the system goes. And you agree to this, and I agree to this. You pay my debt off. I'll work for you. I'm your servant for 6 years. The 7th year, you have to let me go if I'm a Hebrew. In that 7th year, you have to do a couple things. We walk out to your flocks together, and you give me some of your flock. We go to your grain, and you give me some of your grain. We go to where you keep your wine, and you give me some of your wine. And it's not just paying off the debt. Now what the master is doing, the master is providing the slave, the servant, with resources to be successful after they leave so they don't fall into the same predicament later. So it wasn't, all right, you're done working for me, leave. The employer or the master had a responsibility to treat that slave properly, and when the debt was paid, to give them enough so that they could be successful in life and their fellow Hebrew does not find themselves in this situation again. Now, there were some other laws that are very interesting. If I was broke and I sold myself into slavery to you and I had a wife, then after 6 years, the wife and I both got to leave. If I sold myself into slavery while I was single and you gave me a wife, well, when I left 7 years later, I could say, bye, Shelley. See ya. She had to stay and be a slave to the people I sold myself into because they gave me her, and my kids would have to stay. Now, I could say, oh, man, I love Shelley, and I love my kids, and I love my master. I think I just want to stay too. And at that point, they would take something and put your ear against the door. They'd poke a hole in your ear, and you would have committed to being that family's slave for the rest of your life along with your wife and your kids. Another protection was if the master hurt the slave permanently, injured him, then he had to let him go. That shows that there was punishment that even involved physical punishment against a slave. A master could inflict that. Now, if you weren't a Hebrew, there were different rules. So if you weren't a Hebrew, you didn't have to let him go after 6 years. And there were just other laws that were involved in that. But the God put this in place because God knows people. He knows people in power have a tendency to abuse other people. He says, you can't do that. You belong to me. I rescued you from slavery. You're going to treat the people that you find under your care in a much better way. In Genesis chapter 24, Abraham had a servant. We don't know the servant's name. I think it's Eleazar. But he tells Eleazar to go find a wife for Isaac. And if you read that whole story, you'll see something very special about the relationship that Abraham had with his slave. The slave, Eleazar, it was Eleazar in this case, he cared for Abraham. Let's read it. Genesis chapter 24 and verse 12. This is the slave saying, then he said, O Lord God of my master Abraham. This is right before he's getting ready to go get a wife for Isaac. He's at the well. He says this, please give me success this day and show kindness to my master Abraham. Behold, here I stand by the well of water, and the daughters of the men of the city are coming out to draw water. Now let it be that the young woman to whom I say, please let down your pitcher that I may drink, and she says, drink, and I will also give your camels drink. Let her be the one you have appointed for your servant Isaac. And by this I will know that you have shown kindness to my master. Now, the whole story illustrates this, so if you have a chance to read the entire story or just call it to your mind, it illustrates this very, very important message. Abraham had servants, and he treated those servants well. And as a result of being treated well, they loved him for it. That's the way it should work. That's the way God intends it for it to work. So God expects bosses to be fair and to treat people properly. But he also expects employees to work hard, even for bad bosses. And that's hard. Let's face it. That's hard. If you have a boss that doesn't treat you right, isn't it easy to justify not doing a good job? I think it's easy to do. I think we're human beings, and it's easy for us to justify that, but that's not what God teaches. In 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 18, it says, servants, be submissive to your masters with all fear, not only to the good and gentle, not only to the Abrahams, but also to those who are harsh. Now, in those times, servants or slaves were not permitted to leave their masters. We talked about this in the government thing. What happens if you don't like the government? What do you have the option of doing? You can leave. You could go to another country if you wanted to. And if you don't like the government in Florida, you could go move to Tennessee or Georgia or whatever the case may be. You have the right to do that. That's a blessing that we have. In their culture, they did not have the right to leave their master. As a matter of fact, remember with the Philemon story? What did Paul tell the slave? You got to go back. You can't just leave like that. You got to go back. You have to fulfill your obligation to your master. But isn't it true that some people, even though they can technically leave their job, they're trapped? Have you ever felt trapped in your job? I mean, seriously. Have you ever felt trapped in a job where you have bills to pay, you have kids you have to take care of, and you don't like your job, and you're working for a bad boss, but you have all these responsibilities, and even though someone might say, why don't you just quit? You're like, I can't quit. I'm just sort of stuck in this job right now. And I think that's what Peter is talking about. To those of you who feel stuck in a job with a boss you don't like, he's going to tell us how we deal with that particular situation. Now, I'm going to take a time out here for a second. Somebody said before the lesson is, why is Dwayne preaching a job like this? Why is he preaching a sermon like this? Is it ulterior motives? Absolutely not. It's just what Peter is talking about. I am perfectly happy with the elders here and all the members here and how we are treated. I don't feel like I'm treated poorly in any way, shape, or form. And so I think that, but I have been in jobs where I've just felt stuck. I don't know what to do next. I don't like my job. I don't like what I'm doing. And that is a very difficult situation to be in. It makes it very challenging for us. Colossians chapter 3 and verse 22. Colossians chapter 3 and verse 22. It says, bondservants, obey in all things your masters according to the flesh, not with eye service as men pleasers, but in sincerity of heart, fearing God. And whatever you do, do it heartily, as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that from the Lord you'll receive the reward of the inheritance, for you serve the Lord Christ. But he who does wrong will be repaid for what he has done, and there is no partiality. So servants need to obey their masters. Why? Because their masters deserve it? Sometimes do we submit to the government even though the government doesn't deserve our submission? Sometimes do wives submit to their husbands even when their husbands don't deserve that? Yes, and sometimes we as employees must submit to our bosses even when our boss is not gentle and fair, our boss is mean, and our boss is harsh. Why? Not because we fear him, but because we fear God. Because we, just like submitting to the government, it's because we're submitting to God. Submit to your bosses, you're actually submitting to God. The Lord will reward those who have a sincere heart and serve their masters well. The reward is considered an inheritance. I love this passage. Think about this for a second. How many of you would keep working in your job if you didn't get paid? Really? Nobody? Not a single person likes their job so much that they continue doing it if they didn't get paid? All right, we got one over here. All right, so you work for a paycheck. But what is he saying here? You work for the fear of God, and you work for the inheritance. Not to deserve the inheritance from God like you've earned it, but what is it saying? You don't say, I'm doing this for my boss because my boss deserves it. You're saying, I'm doing this for God because God deserves his servant to act this way and live this way, to represent him well. So that when someone sees the way that I'm working, even though my boss is mean and hateful and bad, they say, how does Dwayne do that? How does he keep a good attitude and keep going even though he's working for someone who is very difficult? So our second point is simply this. First point, bosses should be good and fair and treat people correctly. Second point is second part of the first point is that we should all work hard for our bosses. But the bottom line is, not all bosses are good. Sometimes that simply doesn't happen. Let's read chapter 2 and verse 18 again. Servants, be submissive to your masters with all fear, not only the good and the gentle, but also to the harsh. For this is commendable if because of conscience sake, toward God, one endures grief, suffering wrongfully. For what credit is it when you are beaten for your faults, you take it patiently? But when you do good and suffer, if you take it patiently, this is commendable before God. Some bosses wrongfully and unfairly treat good employees. And sometimes Christians fall in that category. Christians are mistreated by other people. Genesis chapter 39 and verse 16 says this. Talking about Potiphar's wife. She kept Joseph's garment until his master came home. Then he spoke to him with words like these, saying, the Hebrew servant whom you brought to us to come to me mocked me. So it happened as I lifted my voice and cried out that he left his garment with me and fled outside. So it was when the master heard the words which his wife spoke to him, saying, your servant did to me after this matter, that his anger was aroused, and Joseph's master took him and put him into a prison, a place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in the prison. Potiphar unjustly treated Joseph because of a lie. There could be times where your boss does something because a customer has lied to you about you to get something from the boss, or somebody has made up something about you, said something that wasn't true, and you are punished because of that. Well, how did Joseph handle that? As a slave, he had fewer recourses, and we'll talk about our recourses later. But he kept doing what God wanted. He kept serving God. And that's what we have to do. In Exodus chapter 1 and verse 11, it says, therefore they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with burdens, and they built for Pharaoh supply cities. And in verse 12, and the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew, and they were of dread of the children of Israel. So the Egyptians made the children of Israel serve with rigor. And they made their lives bitter with hard bondage in mortar and brick and in all manner of service in the field. All this service in which they made them serve was with rigor. The Egyptians afflicted the Israelites and made their lives bitter and hard with bondage. Sometimes bosses do that. They put more work on you than you can do. And they don't care. Because they're trying to get their own life in order, and they put as much on you as they possibly can. Sometimes masters are not fair. Matthew chapter 20 verse 24 says this, and when the 10 heard it, they were greatly displeased with the two brothers. But Jesus called them to himself and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles, what do? They lord it over them. And those who are great exercise authority over them. Many people in authority use their power to improve their own lives at the expense of those that they work underneath them. You know what's amazing? How many of you have ever had a really good boss? That's probably more amazing. That's rare to have great bosses, because what is human nature for people who are serving the devil? Human nature for people who are serving the devil is not to treat people right. It's to treat people in bad ways. So the fact that all of us have had bosses that we have enjoyed working for is an amazing thing. And it's a blessing. It is not the norm. Well, what do we do as Christians if we're not treated right at work? Now, at the beginning, almost everybody raised their hands. They've had a boss they didn't like at some point in their life. And I have some really bad news for you. I hate to break it to you. It might be that you have a bad boss in the future. Chances are you will have a different boss someday than you have now. That's just the way life works. And somebody might get promoted over you, and you might not get along with them. There might be a possibility where you have a boss that you just don't like. Here's my first suggestion. If possible, plan so you are never in a position to be someone's slave or have to have a job where someone is mistreating you. And I'm really talking to the younger people right now. You never want to be so desperate for the necessities of life that you agree to work long hours in bad conditions with little pay. First, live within your means. Not always easy. I am not saying that as someone who's always done that. I'm just telling you, God says to do it. And if you live within your means or under your means, it's going to protect you from being in a position that you don't want to be in, where you can say, I'm out. I'm going to go look for something else. Where you're not desperate, as sometimes we find ourselves. Save your money. Let me ask you, I have a boss I don't like. Terry has the same boss, and the guy's a jerk to both of us. I'm broke. Terry has $100,000 in the bank. Who's in a better position? Terry by far, because Terry can say, I'm out. I can't, because I got a mortgage next week. I got to pay that bill. So if you eliminate your debt as much as possible and you save as much money as you can, you are going to isolate you. Now, who tells you to do that? God tells you to do that. So what's God doing? He's showing you ways to protect yourself from this situation if we just listen to him. But sometimes we don't. Sometimes we find ourselves in trouble. We don't listen to him. Another very important point, especially for those of you who are younger, get some form of education or some form of training that somebody can't take away from you. Once you have a degree or a skill or knowledge, you can leave a job. If you don't have skill, you don't have a degree, you don't have a certification of some sort, it makes it so much more difficult for you to leave. So understand that if you don't do that, if you don't get some kind of a degree or some type of a certification or something, a skill, I mean, that's a great, I mean, there's, nowadays, I don't know how new this is. Maybe I just never heard of it when I was a kid, but becoming a subject matter expert at work, do that. I mean, if you can be a subject matter expert on anything, study, do that. Have knowledge, have skills that no one else has. Or be better at your job than everybody else. If you're better at your job than everybody else, then you're not going to be mistreated as often. And work hard. Those are all important things. Develop skills that people need. Don't be stubborn. Don't be, this is what I want to do. Well, I tell you, I wanted to be a professional baseball player. I really did. But I lacked something very important for that. It's called skill. I couldn't do that. So I had to realize, I have to figure out what I'm good at, and I have to develop a skill so that somebody might want to hire me one day. Nobody owes you a job. Nobody owes you a job. That's just not the way it works. You have to prepare yourself to meet a need in the workplace and then do a good job and be good at your job and work hard. That's what God intends for you to do. So by way of what can you do, prepare yourself so you never fall in that situation. In our current environment, you are free to find another job. And so what else can you do? If you find yourself in a bad position, you are free to quit. Now, I think it's less prevalent now. I like it out of a matter of respect. And maybe it's a generational thing. Maybe it's the level of job that you have, but I really do think you should give somebody notice when you quit, if you're going to quit, unless you're just totally mistreating you. I think if you prepare appropriately and you get a job before you quit, you can give the proper notice, and that way you're above board. They don't deserve it necessarily, but you've done everything you can to make God look good. And they can't talk bad about your God because of the way you've acted. You said, all right, I have the right to get another job. I'm going to exercise that because I don't like working for you. You don't necessarily have to tell them that if you don't want. But then you can act in a way that's appropriate. And you can say, I got another job. I quit. I start in 2 weeks. I'll be glad to fulfill my next 2 weeks for you, turn over whatever accounts I have or whatever job responsibility I have to the next guy, and do the best I can for you. And that is something that you have to do as a Christian as far as working to the very end. You could always talk to your boss and let him or her know that they're not treating you properly. That's really a biblical concept, right? If somebody does something against you, what should you do? Go talk to them. I would suggest you talk to them before you go talk to their boss or their boss's boss or before you go talk to HR, but all those are possibilities. That's the great thing about the government lesson and the great thing about this lesson. You have options for the most part, and you can exercise whatever option you have to put yourself in a better situation. I'm not going to read the passage again in 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 19. It's there in your outline. But here are some things that you must be willing to do. You must be willing to endure grief. If you have a job you don't like and your boss isn't treating you right, if you don't have the means to get another job right now, if you're not in a situation where that's possible for you and you feel stuck in that job, you have to be willing to endure the grief. It could be not your fault. It could be your fault, depending on how you put yourself in that situation. We must be willing to take unwarranted discipline patiently. It's so hard. That's so hard. We must still do good. We must work hard for our bosses and do what they say. Even the bad ones. If we're still employed by that company, what is our responsibility as Christians? To do our best to the very last day. That is our responsibility. We don't cut corners. We don't mail it in. We work hard until our very last day with that company. And you know what? We might have to continue working long hours for just enough money to eat until we can figure something else out. And I think if we review that passage with these points in mind, I think you'll see they're all there. Well, here's what we can't do. We can't sin. When Jesus was mistreated, did Jesus sin? Was he way more mistreated than you've ever been? By far. And that's what it says in this passage. He's our example. So we can't steal from our company. We can't slack off and not do a good job. I mean, there's all these things we cannot do. We cannot sin. We cannot lie. If we did something wrong, we can't lie about that. If we mistreated a customer and the customer tells on us, we can be mad at that customer all day long, but we can't lie about that. We can't lie about anybody. We have to take responsibility for what we do. We can't lie. Jesus didn't lie. We can't revile. Now, I'm ashamed of this, but I had a boss I didn't like. And none of us liked him. And we made up a nickname for him that wasn't respectful, okay? It just wasn't respectful. That's wrong. That's reviling. You shouldn't talk bad about your boss behind your boss's back. You shouldn't have this water cooler conversation. Hey, you know what? I really don't like the boss. What do you think about him? That isn't healthy at all. That's not what a Christian should do. That's not what Jesus did, and that's not what we should do. We can't make any threats. You know, you have rights in our country. We have rights. So if someone's mistreating you, you have the right to sue. You have the right to do whatever you want. But to make threats is not a godly thing to do. And ultimately, what must we do? We must trust God. Because even all of our jobs, they're temporary. I mean, we have to work for 40 years we're going to be in heaven forever. So that's a small price to pay. Even if you had, and no one's had a bad boss their entire life, and none of us are in a situation where we can't have a better boss tomorrow if we wanted one. It might take us a little while then for tomorrow, but we can always better ourselves and get in a better position. Matthew 6:33 says, "Seek first the kingdom of God," because who pays us anyway? Who gives us our reward? Don't work for the paycheck. We work for the inheritance. We do our job because that's what God wants us to do, not because that's what our boss wants us to do. We don't work as men pleasers. We work because we're trying to please God. So regardless of what our boss does, it's irrelevant to a large degree because we're not working primarily for our boss. We're working for God. And God is the one that sees how we're working, and God can look down at us and say, that person is working hard even though their boss is mistreating them because they fear me and they love me. Wouldn't that be great if we're in that situation, if that's how God's looking at us? I think that's what we should be shooting for. 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 8, "And having enough food and clothing, with these you shall be content." 2 Corinthians 4:17, "Our light affliction, which is but for a moment, is working for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. While we do not look at the things which are seen, but at the things which are unseen. For the things which are seen are temporary, but the things which are not seen are eternal." And just one last thought for bosses. I know we have some bosses in the audience. Be fair. Treat people the way God would want you to treat them. Ephesians 6 and verse 9 says, "And you, masters, do the same things to them, giving up threatening, knowing that your own master also is in heaven, and there is no partiality with him." Ultimately, remember the golden rule. How would you want someone to work for you if you were the boss? How would you want to be treated if you were the employee and somebody was your boss? How do you want to be treated by your boss? If you follow that golden rule, it's going to answer a lot of these questions. Life isn't always easy. Sometimes there are challenges. Sometimes our government doesn't act the way we want our government to act. They expect things of us that we don't want to do. We have to submit. What happens if we work at a company that has a bad boss? Well, we have lots of options. But while we're working there, we do our best not to honor ourselves, not for the paycheck, but to honor God, who is our Father. If we can help anybody in any way come to the Lord and do the right thing, please come as we stand and sing.